Hello and welcome to Alpha CG. In the last few videos, we had finished modeling the cone and lighting the scene. In this video, we'll texture the cone with a procedural node setup. Before we begin texturing, we need to make some adjustments to the render settings. We'll be using cycles for rendering the scene for a bit more realism, although the scene would look just about fine in Eevee. You can leave the sample count at default and enable adaptive sampling. Under light paths, we'll change up a few settings to reduce render times. The total bounces can be reduced to 4. Reduce the diffuse and glossy bounces to 1 or 2 at most. Set the transparency and transmission bounces to 0 since we don't have any objects that could make use of this. Since we don't have any refractive objects in the scene, disable refraction. Enable simplify. Under color management, change the view transform to raw, increase the exposure to 2 and gamma to 1.5. Now we can begin texturing. We'll open up the shading workspace and add a material to the cone. Before I begin making the node setup, I'll quickly explain some basic texturing and masking concepts. A value of 1 indicates absolute white while a value of 0 indicates absolute black. Since we are associating these two colors with numbers, we can also perform mathematical operations on them. The concept we'll be using is subtracting one from the other. We'll be using its object output. Add a mapping node. This will be to control the positioning of the stripes. Separate XYZ node and put that there. We'll be using the Z output and add a match node. Duplicate that twice and then change this one's type to greater than and this one's type to greater than. Plug this one's output to this one's input and plug the Z output to the value input. Change this one's type to subtract, and with that we'll have the basic setup for stripes. We'll change the threshold to 2 and this one to 2.2. The difference between this value and this value is the thickness of the stripe. So essentially this node decides the thickness because this is the base and this is the subtracted value. So you can give it a lower value if you want a thinner stripe. Now the way we'll have a second stripe is just by duplicating this and manipulating the location of it. So the data that we'll be manipulating is the Z-axis location. I'll just change this to 1, and with that we have two stripes. Right now I'm not rendering it as I'm teaching it because my computer tends to lag when I do that. So right now you'll see this one stripe and then there's a second stripe. Now we need to combine these two, so you can add math node and change this to add, and also clamp this so that the values stay between 0 and 1. So what we are essentially doing is taking this input right here. There's this value of 1, right? So all these are parts which have which are valued at 1, and as per this node only this much portion is 1. Now we are saying that take this as the input and subtract this small amount of the white region, and the output is this stripe. We are just repeating this and changing the location to get a second stripe, and this is the output. Now in order to add color to it, we'll use this mask that we created. So we'll just add a mix RGB node, use the mask as a factor. So when we use a mask, anything that's black is given the first color in the RGB node, and anything that's white is given the second color in the RGB node. And we'll leave the type as is. Change the first color to orange, a shade of orange. This is pretty good, and with that we've finished the basic texture. We're just missing one thing, and that's ambient occlusion. So that we'll just add the ambient occlusion node. You'll see that the output has some black to white gradient closer to the edges. You can exaggerate the effect by adding a color ramp and then moving up the black slider to that much, and you can play with this value and see what works best for you. Duplicate this RGB node and make sure this output is plugged into the second input of this node, and we'll use the ambient occlusion as the factor. So now you'll see the output, there's not a huge difference. That's because we're using the same color in both these. Now if I bring down the value, you'll see there's some difference in the edges. So I think that's pretty good for the ambient occlusion. I'm not going to make it too pronounced. And that's pretty much done. We just change the roughness to 0.45. Cones are usually reflective, but I just want it to be just a very subtle effect. And with that, we come to the end of this tutorial. Hope you enjoyed watching this video. If you did, do leave a like, comment if you have any queries, or if you'd like to share anything, and don't forget to subscribe. Thank you for watching.